From a young age, we are seeking entertainment. Whether that was playing ball, watching our favorite morning cartoons, or playing video games. All of those activities helped us detach from the mundane routine. It helped us forget our hardships for a period of time. It helped us escape. For many, that escape came with the liberty of exploration. Think Super Mario, Banjo-Kazooie, or a personal favorite, Jazz Jackrabbit. For many, it came with the freedom of creativity, living a second life in The Sims, creating castles in Minecraft, but for most of us, it came with a more brutal side. Imagine liberating a world full of demons that was destined to be doomed, or being the sole survivor on an alien planet, like in Quake. The entertainment came from the fantasy of it all. Aliens, demons, things that were not present after we turned the game off. As graphics and visuals progressed through the years, game developers got into an arms race of sorts to create the most realistic game out there. The most authentic game experience where we could immerse ourselves for endless hours, to a point where we could not distinguish reality from fiction. Whether it was a desolate, diseased world that was abandoned by God himself, where we had only one goal, survive by any means necessary, or an exclusion zone that sent chills down our spines as the thrill of exploring the forbidden land fueled our curiosity, not knowing what we would find. Survival is key, and no one knows that better than Battlestate Games. My name is Phobos. We will be here for a while, so make yourself comfortable, and take my hand as we explore the world of Escape from Tarkov, the king of extraction shooters. The mid to late 2010s are a blur when it comes to survival games, releasing into two categories: either reviving a dead franchise and putting a new spin on it, like Resident Evil 7, or promising ingenuity in the field only to succumb to the pressure and the deadlines, ultimately sealing its fate and being dead on arrival, like No Man's Sky. There was no in-between. That's when murmurs and teasers began appearing of a realistic, tactical, military simulation game called Escape from Tarkov. The game promised a lot: realistic gunplay, fluid movement, an intricate looting and inventory system, expansive weapon customization. It ticked all the boxes for survival game enjoyers and looked better and better as Battlestate Games, the developers of EFT, posted more and more updates on the game's evolution. While it was a realistic take on the FPS genre, with a more sophisticated system for weapons, where the damage was not determined by the gun we were using, but the ammo type, which then in turn we had to individually pack into the gun's magazines. A lot more steps added in from the usual take mag out, put mag back in, slap it for good measure, done. On top of that, the game sported a more complicated healing system as well, having specific items for specific injuries like bandages for light bleeds, tourniquets for heavy bleeds, and so on, which can occur on different limbs, starting with the head all the way to the legs. Once a body part was blacked out, players had to stitch them back together. Long gone are the days when the corner of our eyes were turning red, indicating that we have been f***ing shot. But no, Billy, just crouch behind a corner, because the redness in your eye will go away in a few seconds and the bullet will magically disappear, just like the product of incompetent people. Escape from Tarkov was heavily influenced by the Stalker franchise and had survival elements similar to DayZ, but its world structure was completely different. While its sources of inspiration were revolving around the player dropping into a fully explorable open world, EFT uses an instance-based lobby, meaning that the player begins at a hub. In this case, the stash menu. Equips the character with everything necessary for survival, chooses one of the many maps to explore, selects a time, mostly a choice of day and night, spawns in a designated location on said map, and after a period of time, depending on the played map, the player has to find an exfil point, bringing any loot found in the raid back to the initial stash, if the player survives, that is. God. There's still two. This raid system is what differentiated Tarkov from the other survival FPS games, ultimately creating a genre of its own, an extraction shooter. While Tarkov does not have a designated storyline or campaign, progression is made through tasks given to the player from the plethora of traders, which have individual gimmicks based on their line of work. That's where the beauty of Tarkov lies. There is no ending. For now. Every player has a different end goal, whether it's to reach the maximum reputation level with each trader, or to collect and give every trinket to a shady Russian guy only to obtain a big box called Kappa. No, not that Kappa. This Kappa. EFT keeps the gameplay loop interesting through the different encounters we may face during our raids. Most of the time it's only going to be the other players and scavengers, the AI-controlled residents of Tarkov. On specific maps, other challenges may arise, such as the rogues, ex-USEC operatives who control the water treatment plant on Lighthouse, or raiders, ex-PMCs who mostly appear on Reserve and Labs. These are bumped up AI characters that need to be fought with a different strategy than your ordinary scav. But with every click of the Find Raid button, there is a chance to come across one of the many boss characters of EFT. The thrill of the unknown, of walking into one of these spots and being surprised by them, is what keeps us on our toes. That is, if we run into them. A big if. Anywhere between 5 to 8 months, the game will wipe the player's progression and reset everyone to the beginning stage. This is a necessary step to keep the game fresh and to maintain the game's economy. Otherwise the game would be impossible to be played by new players. Little Timmy's running into max level players who are geared with the top-notch equipment. While Tarkov became the mammoth it is known today, it had to climb up to that status along many years of development. Many years of trial and error. For a while it was the only extraction shooter, looter shooter, first-person shooter, PvPvE, EV. For a while Tarkov was the only option for players to experience this level of thrill. The kill or be killed atmosphere, where one misstep could lead to all of our equipment becoming someone else's possession. Only other honorable mention was Tom Clancy's The Division, released in 2016, which sported the Dark Zone game mode, that had the same premise of the extraction shooter games we know today. Players enter the contaminated zone, grab as much loot as they can while fighting off enemy players, extract with said loot. Ubisoft later tried its hand at expanding on this concept amidst the boom of the extraction shooter genre in early 2020s with its The Division Heartline entry. After countless delays and excuses, it ultimately got cancelled in May of 2024. So with that in mind, entering the 2020s and the unspeakable horrors that the world brought upon itself, Escape from Tarkov was still the #1 option for this niche of FPS games. It was unrivaled in both player base and viewership on Twitch. That is until a slumbering game dev company woke up from their beauty sleep and challenged the behemoth at their own game. Enter Jaeger Development, previously known for Spec Ops The Line, a single-player third-person shooter released in 2012. Afterwards, Jaeger returned to their roots to create combat flight simulators, until the year of 2019, where they dabbled into the world of extraction shooters and were tinkering with the concept of this genre. Ultimately, through many prototypes and playtests, on the 8th of June 2022, Jaeger released The Cycle Frontier, a free-to-play PvE extraction shooter. Yes, we'll talk about that sequence in just a bit. While it garnered the attention of many content creators and game critics, most of them already experiencing Escape from Tarkov, it did not escape, no pun intended, the cruel fate of being called a Tarkov clone, despite the fact that it basically inherited nothing from the prior title. The Cycle differentiated itself from its competitor by having a completely different setting. The art style was unique, cartoony, colorful, full of life, both in its vast flora across all the regions of the planet and its occupants, different variations of aliens. The gameplay was a lot more simple. The player only had a singular health bar, which wasn't divided into multiple limbs and body parts. That was tended to only by health syringes, as opposed to bandages, tourniquets, splints, and so on. The combat had the same treatment. Ammo didn't need to be packed into individual mags, only a single bullet type per weapon category, where the damage was dealt by the weapon, not the ammo type. All of these differences making it a more beginner-friendly version of EFT. Whereas we had different screens for vendors, stash, and hideout, the Cycle merged all of those into a playable experience with the Prospect Station. We assumed the character's control in a third-person perspective, and were free to explore the majority of the space station. Here we could find the 3 factions, from which we received tasks and could buy different types of equipment. Along with those we had a crafting station, a cosmetics store, and the Prospector Quarters, our hotel room high above the main floor, where we could access our stash and the computer, which had the same functionality as the hideout in Tarkov. It was an interesting concept, and it was pretty cool at the start, but for a prolonged time it would become more and more tedious to walk between the factions, to hand in tasks, and to buy certain equipment. Now, When we decided to jump into a raid, we had the possibility to choose between 3 maps. Bright Sands, the primary tropical island housing low-level creatures and changing biomes, ranging from beaches to swamps to the dangerous jungle. Crescent Falls, speaking of jungle, here's a bigger one, home to sweaty players and dangerous high-level creatures. And last but not least, Tharis Island. Small island housing many cave systems, including the tunnel system leading to the Forge, an alien structure hidden in the depths of the island. The maps were very different from one another, each garnering a gimmick. Bright Sands was the home of Timmies. You would bump into them most of the time with low-level gear, while they were trying to complete one of the more challenging tasks of gathering 50 sunflowers. Crescent Falls became the home of the Sweats. Streamers and content creators made this map theirs to create montages as they're slide cancelling all over the place. And Tharis Island was home to the biggest population of rats. Rule of thumb was that wherever there was a shadow, there was a player hiding within. While the cycle was struggling with the number and quality of the maps, that wasn't its selling point. What it highlighted was its emphasis on the player versus environment concept. This is why the PvEVP was not a typo a couple of minutes ago. In theory, yes, there's an argument to be made as to why eradicating creatures instead of sweats is a good idea for progression. But in practice, it falls flat on its own when it introduces multiple, and I mean multiple, tasks to neutralize enemy players with XYZ weapon type. On top of that, the game didn't have a timer for raids, meaning if someone really wanted to play it out and was successful in surviving, they very well could stay on the map at least until the server would shut down and disconnect them manually. With this in mind, to combat loot hoarding and AI not spawning, the game introduced the Cycle. Insane name drop. The Cycle was a roaring thunderstorm that lasted 4 minutes, during which the player either had to find a roof above their head and stay safe for the duration, or be a mad lad and do their thing outside in pitch black darkness while dodging the thunder strikes. During this time the evac ships were not functional, so if the player willingly ignored the broadcasting of the thunderstorm approaching, they were stuck in the raid for the following 4 minutes. Despite the evident lack of content, for a free-to-play game, the Cycle Frontier was a great gateway into the extraction shooter genre, letting people have a taste of the thrill while being available to everyone, even the cheaters. When the game launched, on top of already having a plethora of server issues, game crashes and poor optimization, it launched with a suboptimal anti-cheat, which only opened the floodgates to wall hacking, aim locking, high flying,
Kid stealing, woo, wheeling dealing, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun.
It took them quite a while to combat the cheaters, and by the time they did, most of their player base already flocked to other places. The cheating problems, the lack of content, and the lack of communication between the studio and the player base ultimately led to the game's demise, as they announced in June of 2023 that the game would be sunset, and every server would be shut down on the 27th of September 2023. With their eyes bigger than their stomach, Jaeger wanted to compete with Escape from Tarkov, the titan of the genre, and in the end crumbled under the pressure and became nothing more than a grain in the desert of the past. Speaking of deserts, in the same year as this cycle was released, a AAA company tried their hand at dethroning Tarkov, a company that is well known for their legendary franchise, that would inspire millions. It's Call of Duty. Infinity Ward released the remake of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on the 28th of October. Packaged with its flagship single-player campaign and multiplayer modes came their home-cooked DMZ mode, Infinity Ward's attempt at an extraction shooter game. Since DMZ came in the same package as Warzone 2, they shared the same maps, for the most part. So players who already experienced Warzone were very familiar with Al Mazrah, a huge map buried in sand with many points of interest, varying levels of threats and missions to accomplish. As time passed, along with new seasons came new maps for DMZ as well. During the middle of Season 1, we got the DMZ exclusive Building 21, a very small indoors map in an unknown location, mostly comprised of offices, server rooms, and never-ending hallways, where only 12 players were playing in one lobby. This map became the prime PvP map. Since it was so small, it would have been impossible not to meet up with one of the other 3 squads present in the lobby. In Season 2 we got Ashika Island, a small island located in Japan, considerably smaller than its main location, only supporting 18 players instead of the 60 that could play on Al Mazrah. In Season 3, with the addition of Koshei Complex, a hidden underground tunnel system under Al Mazrah, Infinity Ward changed their ways on how they approach world building. Where Building 21 and Ashika Island were accessible through the main menu, in order to access Koshei Complex, players would have to go to Al Mazrah, find one of the access points around the map, and travel from one map to the other, carrying everything they had on their character with them. Then in Season 4 they went back to the old format and added Vondel.
Chemical attack in the city of Vondel.
Vondel.
There is something very wrong in Vondel.
Vondel.
Soldiers on the ground to resecure the area and prevent the collapse of Vondel.
Vondel. A small city in Netherlands, along their new version of Resurgence mode. These maps were brought to life with varying levels of AI. Some POIs had the usual unarmored goons, while some had level 2 armored bullet sponges. Fighting these AI enemies was very problematic, because of how unbalanced they were. They would turn from someone who picked up a gun for the first time to John Wick in a split second. Paired with the game's armor system, where the player would start with only one armor plate, it became very annoying when a group of AI could chew through the armor and the player's health in a matter of seconds. On top of that, every map had at least one boss character as well, with differing gimmicks and equipment. This led the player to think and strategize on how to engage them. While the maps were well crafted, and the players were engaged with all the different enemies they would face, on top of the threat of meeting other squads, DMZ flopped when it came to the other aspects of the game. The inventory system was very bare bone, being equipped with a small backpack which could only hold 6 items. That includes money, ammo, or extra equipment. Upgrading it, the backpack would eventually be able to hold 10 items and a third gun. Compared to other games in the genre, DMZ didn't have a stash system, only a weapons locker, which led to the player having to skip looting mundane items and only focus on finding weapons, ammo, and equipment, further incentivizing PvP instead of character progression. The main source of income for the player, besides selling some valuable items like gold bars or graphics cards, would be to complete contracts spread around the map, anything from finding buried pirate chests to hunting down another squad. With that in mind, 80 to 90% of the items found in Raid had no purpose whatsoever, unless they were necessary for a barter, a system they introduced way too late into the game's life cycle, or a task. Which leads me to my next point. Tasks in the game were practically non-existent. Very basic and repetitive quests that would only require the player to either loot something and extract with it, or to eliminate targets over and over again. The exception being the weapons case mission, that required the player to fight one of the aforementioned bosses and loot a weapon crate, that was traceable on everyone's map. Extracting this would yield different rewards, anything from cosmetics to a weapon blueprint. A fun task to accomplish, but unnecessary and stale after extracting it 7 times, the maximum amount needed for the last reward. With very little progression, non-existent economy, a limited amount of content, and its PvP-focused gameplay loop, DMZ was the watered-down version of COD's more popular Battle Royale mode. Overshadowed by Warzone's success, and with DMZ's player count reaching lower and lower numbers, Infinity Ward pulled the plug on the extraction shooter experiment on the 1st of December 2023. With no further updates in sight, DMZ would officially be dead in the water, despite the fact that it's still playable to this day. 2 titles that wanted to break new ground in the extraction shooter genre. 2 titles that wanted to compete with the behemoth of Escape from Tarkov. 2 titles that have met their demise very early on. Whether that's because the project was rushed, wanting to capitalize on the trend going on instead of having a sound structure, or simply because it wasn't worth the time and the effort, since other flagship game modes were raking in a ton more money. Unfortunately, that's how 2 games with huge potential were thrown to the wolves, unable to survive in the harsh climate that Tarkov has created. I primarily focused on the divide between Escape from Tarkov and the 2 failed titles in the last chapter, ignoring an outlier that chronologically came before both the cycle and DMZ. I did so because it didn't feel right to talk about this game in the past tense, when it did nothing but evolve as time passed by. The year? 2019. The company? Crytek. The setting? The Wild Wild West. The game? It's Hunt Showdown. I admire Crytek for one simple thing. Despite Hunt being labeled as an extraction shooter or quote-unquote the best Tarkov alternative, the game wasn't conceived with that in mind. Outside of the core mechanics of an extraction shooter game, there is no similarity between Hunt Showdown and Escape from Tarkov. And that's a good thing. Starting off, Hunt Showdown utilizes a permadeath mechanic, which means that once the player's character meets their unfortunate demise in a raid, that character, along with all the loot they had on them, is no more. To make this mechanic work, a recruitment system is introduced, where the player can recruit a bounty hunter into their roster, and then choose between which one they want to send into the raid. Their loadout and equipment may vary depending on the hunter's tier. Going into raid, the player's objective is to hunt down the bounty, which are the boss characters, eradicate them, collect the remains, and haul ass to the extraction. In order to find their location, each character has a thermal vision ability that highlights the traces of clues. Finding 3 clues marks the bounty on the player's map, and the road to the Lovecraftian horrors is presented to the player. Upon mercilessly murdering them, the player will need to start banishing their soul back to hell, an act that lets every other bounty hunter know the player's location. An inevitable western standoff would ensue shortly after. Once the banishing process is complete, the boss will drop 2 bounty tokens, which give the player temporary wall hacks in order for the player to spot rats camping the escape route. Once the player extracts with the tokens, they are rewarded with experience points and cash, which unlocks new gear and the ability to buy new hunters and weapons. Such a simple concept, and it works wonders, because the gameplay loop can be addicting. The thrill of Hunt Showdown doesn't come from amassing over 100 kilograms of loot in a single raid. It comes from the risk of survival, knowing that one mistake can lead to that one character the player put countless hours into vanishing in a blink of an eye. It works because it's not trying to copy another game. Quite the contrary. Hunt Showdown was conceived with the idea of it being an alternative battle royale game. Thus it didn't grab the attention of many people, only fluctuating around the 3,000 mark. But once people got accustomed to its concept, and with constant updates and new content being delivered to the player base, nowadays Crytek's extraction shooter is hovering around 24,000 concurrent players. Why did Hunt Showdown succeed where the previous titles have failed? It succeeded because it has a distinct identity, a unique playstyle, something to differentiate it from its competitors. It's not Tarkov but in Florida. It is crazy to say out loud that the recipe for success is to be original and create a title with a backbone to stand on, but seeing as many game developers are missing the mark, some people need to hear it. People like Madfinger Games, the studio behind Grey Zone Warfare. A title fresh out of the oven, it gained popularity towards the end of 2023 thanks to the amazing visuals it boasted, along with showing off some solid gunplay in its pre-alpha gameplay reveal. Further uploads showed off the core mechanics the game would have as a foundation, mainly the open world of Lamang Island in Southeast Asia. Similar to DayZ, the players would be able to explore the large map consisting of dense rainforests, rice fields, and varying sizes of villages. The player will be able to choose from 3 factions. The only purpose this had was to set up the team-oriented PvP, since it made no difference which of the 3 factions the player chose initially. The player then has the ability to roam around and gear up in the faction's home base. Once they decide to head out, they would need to call a helicopter to take them to one of the multiple landing zones. Once there, it was free roam city. After engaging the island's militia and surviving the other player's onslaught, when the player wanted to extract, they would need to go to one of these LZs and
Get to the chopper!
Which showed the first crack in the game's development. Seeing as the game is in constant flow and players are continuously traveling between their respective bases and the battle zone, people would have to wait good chunks of time until one of the 4 choppers each faction's possessed was able to pick them up either to go into battle or to exfil. Limited travel and long wait times would be the least of their worries because at launch, the game was an absolute shit show. Framerate issues, with even the beefiest computer rigs having difficulties running the game, constant server hiccups, unresponsive hit registration, and so on. Everyone came to the same consensus that Grey Zone Warfare was released to the public way too soon, with little to no content and the plethora of issues mentioned before. With the only redeeming quality being its amazing graphics, Grey Zone didn't dodge the labeling bullet either, very early on being called Tarkov, but in Vietnam, and justifyingly so. Having a very similar, if not the same exact healing system, weapon customization system, and looting system. Madfinger Games, a well-known company for some mobile games, wanted to create something special. Something to catch the eye of the public, and once all eyes were on Grey Zone, they proceeded to fumble the bag. With all that being said, we have to remember that the game is still in early development. For a game in an alpha state, it has a lot of potential, not only to distinguish itself from its competitors, but also to innovate the genre itself. Although Grey Zone lost a lot of players due to the rushed launch, peaking at 70,000 players is no small feat, and should be a good indicator of what lies ahead. Why was the project rushed? It may have something to do with the state of Tarkov in the spring of 2024. If you're watching this after everything that happened during that period and still don't know what I'm referring to, just know that you're precious. Just as precious as a like and a subscription from you. Much appreciated. Circling back to Tarkov, Battlestate Games did an oopsie in April of this year. A pretty big one. The gist of the situation is that BSG revealed a new purchasable edition for the game, called the Unheard Edition, priced at a whopping $250. Outside of some cosmetics and a special name color, the Unheard Edition granted new players additional perks and most of all, the brand new PvE co-op mode that had its own separate progression along with no wipes as opposed to its PvP counterpart. This came after their announcement of retiring the Edge of Darkness edition in January of this year, which at that time was the most expensive edition of the game. The owners of the EOD edition were promised free access to all subsequent DLCs upon purchase, but when the Unheard edition dropped, that statement got blurry very quick. Upon launch, even the owners of the EOD edition had to pay extra in order to access the PvE mode, which directly contradicted what BSG stated earlier in the year. After a couple of Reddit posts, written as feedback to the complaints of the player base, which only stirred the pot further and further, in the end BSG caved in and granted those perks to the EOD owners of the game, who have been supporting EFT since the start. After this drama, Nikita, the head developer of Escape from Tarkov, became more active on Twitter as well, constantly interacting with the player base and setting up surveys on upcoming features and events, something that has been implemented directly into the game. While everything came to a bittersweet conclusion, the damage has been done and a lot of players flocked to the other titles in protest of everything that has transpired until the new wipe starts in a week or two. That was one of the main reasons why Grey Zone Warfare and other titles that have released or were being playtested during this time have gained a lot of attention and playtime. While Grey Zone is already released to the public, let's take a glimpse into the future of the extraction shooter genre, starting with another title that peaked its head during the Unheard Edition scandal. The game is developed by More Fun Studios, a subsidiary of Tencent, the Chinese megacorporation. That information already lets the players know that the backing and the resources are infinite. It shares the name with its mobile counterpart, but the developers have stated that instead of porting the mobile version over to PC, they are building it from the ground up. With its first closed beta ending on 28th of June, it's still very fresh in people's memory. That and due to the fact that it's 90% a carbon copy of Escape from Tarkov. Health and limb system is the same, gunplay and weapon customization is near identical, the valuable items are making a cameo appearance as well. Hell, they even adopted Tarkov's old recoil system, where the gun would kick up and then stabilize, which got changed very quickly because of how bad it was. Only positives ABI is bringing to the table are the graphics, since it was made in Unreal Engine 4, and the presence of an in-raid map and compass UI, which make navigation a piece of cake. Will Arena Breakout Infinite be the main competitor to Tarkov, or just another title that profited from the Unheard Edition drama? Only time will tell, when it fully releases. Hey, Phobos from the future here. ABI has been fully released for 2 days as of this recorded segment, and I got some answers to that hypothetical question I asked a few seconds ago. Seeing as the game is published and backed by Tencent, no one was surprised that they would push microtransactions in their games. They even reacted to that same issue in one of their videos. What was their answer?
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you something.
We don't care.
The short and sweet of it is that ABI has a currency called bonds that can be purchased for real money. What's their purpose, you ask? Well, to buy a secure container, of course, of the same size you start with in that Unheard game. If you want to fully break the piggy bank, you can buy a matching keychain to store your keys as well. Now here's the punchline. You can only possess those for 30 days, after which you have to buy them again. Why spend our valuable time going into thrilling raids to meet other players and take their loot in Tarkov, when we can just buy in-game currency with real money and never run out of kits to run in Arena Breakout? This is what happens when Escape from Tarkov and Alien Isolation make sweet love and conceive a child. And it's absolutely intriguing. Taking place on an isolated research facility on the South Pole, after an experiment went wrong, the player is tasked to find out what happened and do the dirty deeds of the scientists that are too scared to step foot in the facility. Reasonably so, since the whole damn place is laced with booby traps.
What, there's something right next to us, Lucky. What's this?
I'm dead.
Level 0 extraction puts a whole new spin on the extraction shooter formula and introduces more ways to threaten and horrify the player. Aliens.
Look at the top of
These could be small and fragile AI-controlled aliens that eat a couple of bullets and flop over, or straight-up player-controlled aliens that have abilities and have an unsatiated hunger to ruin the human player's fun, that can only be eradicated by flashing lights in their eyes. And with them having a literal EMP ability, good luck with a flimsy flashlight. While the game only had a couple of weeks in the limelight, it garnered a good chunk of followers, due to the horror spin they added to the classic extraction shooter genre. Definitely a game to keep our eyes on and see how it develops. Straight out of left field, in a world where Call of Duty and Battlefield were dominating the military FPS shooters, Delta Force comes out swinging with its newest installment, and by the looks of it, it's looking real promising. Within the trailers and the ongoing playtests, Delta Force revealed that it's going to be divided into multiple game modes. The classic campaign, where old players can relive the nostalgia, while new players can experience firsthand the events of Black Hawk Down in the stunning Unreal Engine 5. If single player isn't your thing, then maybe unrestricted sandbox warfare would probably get your jimmies going in a multiplayer experience very reminiscent of Battlefield. Who am I kidding? If you're still watching this video, then you're only interested in the Hazard Operations mode, the extraction shooter they are including in the 3-game mode package. If the stunning graphics didn't persuade people to try this game out, then the similarities to DMZ, Call of Duty's defunct extraction shooter title, should do the trick. With fast-paced movement and gunplay, Middle Eastern foes reminiscent of Al-Qatala, and a mission very similar to the weapons case hunt, it's near impossible not to compare it or at least call it DMZ's spiritual successor. Delta Force will have a roster of characters the player can choose from that come equipped with their own abilities in the field of battle. Drones that smoke an area, a revive pistol, and much more. And finally, someone looked at DMZ's inventory system and proceeded to projectile vomit everywhere. Thus, Hazard Operations will come with the bread and butter grid-style inventory system. Delta Force waking up from its slumber and putting on its gloves to compete with all the other companies feels refreshing to say the least. And I'm certain I'm not the only one awaiting the release of such a beautiful looking title in the near future. Let's just pray it doesn't go down the same route DMZ did a couple of years back. With everything said and done, let's bring it back to the reason this video was made. A love letter to the extraction shooter genre, and the importance of why well-crafted competition is necessary for a space like this. This video is not another State of Tarkov or the 1 millionth this next game is going to put Tarkov into the coffin clickbait type shtick. This video should bring light to the many things Battlestate games have done right in order to put Escape from Tarkov into such a dominating position, where no other game or company can come close to the feel and experience Tarkov offers to the player. But at the same time, to not forget the many controversies and missteps BSG has taken against its own players, who have supported their project from the very beginning. We have seen games come and go, with new interesting titles on the horizon, but can any of them dethrone Escape from Tarkov? Can any of them become the new king of extraction shooters? Should they build up their empire with that goal in mind? While I am not equipped to answer such questions, I am however certain of one aspect. The only thing that can kill Escape from Tarkov is Escape from Tarkov itself. My name is Phobos. This is where I lie. And with Tarkov's wipe imminent, along with the market booming with amazing titles on the horizon, there's a hell of a lot more to come. Until then, thanks for watching.